All right, I've got a few minutes past the hour. I know people will join us as they are able over time. I think in the interest of time, we'll get moving forward. So, so welcome everybody. So this is the launch of the Pacific Islands Climate Adaptation Science Center seminar series, A Slice of PyCask. Let me do a little sound check, or just a couple of people I can see faces. Give me a thumbs up. You can hear me okay? Everything is good? Thumbs up, awesome. All right, so welcome, and some digital thumbs. Thank you for that. I'm gonna say this a couple of times, just some housekeeping logistic fun things that probably many of us are very used to, but just in case. As a reminder, please keep your mics muted, although I think Rachel Lentz in the background is maybe doing that on your behalf. I believe that your seminar will be best viewed in speaker mode, especially once we get going on the shared screen that hopefully you already see. And please do feel free to ask questions in the chat during the presentation, and we'll manage those with some live questions during Q&A at the end. For your live questions, please raise your digital hand. And if you're not familiar, you can find that at the bottom of your Zoom screen under the Reactions tab. And of course, we'll do our best to recognize you to then unmute and ask your question. And we're going to save the chat, and we are recording. So hopefully you were informed of that. So if we don't have time to get to everybody's questions today, especially with those that are in the chat, we will endeavor to follow up with you shortly thereafter. So, hi, my name is Darren Lerner, and while I'm an environmental physiologist in my academic training, in my spare time, I serve as the University Consortium Director of PyCask, or perhaps it's the other way around. I'll let you make a decision on that. We will be meeting like this in this seminar series monthly at noon in Hawaii time, on the first Tuesday of each month. And we really, I think like many people, we eagerly anticipate the opportunity to hold these as hybrid events and to accommodate folks in person in HIG, if you're not familiar, Hawaii Institute of Geophysics building on the Manoa campus in room 210. And when we start doing that, we're going to look to provide some lunch too. So a little further in enticement, if you will, to come join us. Information on our November and December speakers, and then every month thereafter will be sent out shortly. So please stay tuned. And if on that note, if you did not receive information about today's seminar directly and you'd like to, please sign up to our mailing list. Rachel has already right there, poof, like it was planned. Oh, it was. Has added the URL to the chat. And as a bonus, if you sign up there, you'll also receive a digital version of our monthly newsletter, The Pandanus. So our seminar series, well, we've been talking about this and thinking about this since at least 2016. So it's why it took 5 years, I don't know, because we're all busy. But we're really stoked to be able to launch today, and especially with our speaker as appropriate for today's inaugural seminar. And the series will focus significantly on the research conducted with support from PyCask and our engagement with cultural and natural resource managers across Hawaii and the US affiliated Pacific Islands. Over time, we'll look to sprinkle in additional voices and perspectives in climate adaptation science and bring in knowledge from across the continent and the globe. So again, stay tuned for more of that. And well, of course, we sure hope that you'll find the series informative and that you'll continue to join us in this endeavor together. I'm going to go back to my logistics thing because we've had some additional people join. So just kind of run through the housekeeping. As a reminder, please keep your mics muted. I think that's being taken care of for you, but just in case, go ahead and set your viewing to speaker mode. Feel free to ask questions in the chat during the presentation. We're going to manage those with live questions during Q&A at the end. And for live questions at the end, please raise your digital hand. It's at the bottom of your screen under the Reactions tab, and we'll do our best job to recognize everybody. If we don't get to everybody, we are going to save the chat. So if we don't have time, we'll get back to you soon. All right. So with that, it really is my pleasure to introduce our Federal Director of PyCask as our inaugural speaker of A Slice of PyCask. So Dr. Mary Vaughn Johnson was previously an agronomist with the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Natural Resources Conservation Service in Temple, Texas. And yes, she can actually create a sentence that has both aloha and y'all in the same sentence. It's impressive. She brings a systems-oriented perspective informed by her experiences in international diplomacy, multifunctional land use solutions, and policy impact assessment. Dr. Johnson originally trained in plant ecology and wildlife sciences. She earned an MS in environmental and plant biology at Ohio University and later a PhD in wildlife science at Texas A&M. Between degrees, she volunteered as an intern with the USGS Biological Resource Division's Palila Restoration Project on Hawaii Island, conducting floristic surveys of invasive, endemic, and naturalized species. In 2010, Mary Vaughn became a AAAS fellow and put this team building strategy into effect. She worked with the US State Department, leading the Lower Mekong Initiative and creating the Friends of the Lower Mekong. In this position, she formed multilateral relationships across multiple disciplines, coordinating between the federal agency, foreign governments, domestic and foreign academic institutions, and multinational foundations, all with the goal of bringing science to policy more effectively. The experience also helped to hone her ability to work with diverse stakeholder interests and negotiate cross-discipline solutions. Mary Vaughn provided scientific expertise to inform the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, which is an international agreement between the US and Canada. And she also served as co-chair of the Global Young Academy, where she worked internationally to promote science-based solutions to local, regional, and global challenges, including those of poverty, clean water access, biodiversity, and agriculture. Her most recent position before joining PyCask was at the USDA, focused on the Conservation Effects Assessment Project, providing leadership and direction in funding of research related to wildlife, wetlands, and agriculture conservation practices by developing collaborative science portfolios that address stakeholder concerns related to sustainable agriculture production systems and water quality at regional and national scales. If you have not had the opportunity yet to converse or otherwise work with Mary Vaughn, you are missing out. I've had the pleasure for the last couple of years to be partnered at the hip, if you will, around PyCask, and it really has been an absolute pleasure and continues to be. And with that, I hand it over to Mary Vaughn. Thanks, Mary Vaughn.
Wow, Darren, I should have let you give the talk because that was really fabulous. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that introduction. I'm glowing now. I do have a technical question. Apparently chats are showing up on the screen share, and I didn't know, I am not running the screen, so I didn't know how that was happening, but if there are chats showing up on the screen share, I haven't noticed it, but I have had people text me that it is, so let's fix that. So aloha and good afternoon. It is now 12:12 on my computer. I really appreciate you guys all joining me this lunch hour here in Hawaii. And if you are coming from farther afield, then good morning if you're on one side and good afternoon if you're on the other. Really appreciate you being here. What I'm going to do today is give you a little bit of the background of what the CASK network is and how we work and how PyCask fits into that. And then go in a little bit about what we are actually doing here in PyCask. So this seminar series has been launched by in partnership with our consortium partners, and I'm sorry, I got distracted by chats, and in partnership with our consortium partners, which I really appreciate Darren taking the lead and organizing this. And I know that we have some other great speakers that are going to follow. So they asked me to sort of lay the foundation, the groundwork for where we're coming from when we talk about PyCask, for those of you who aren't familiar with where we're coming from. So mahalo, and next slide, please. So this is the history of the CASC network. The CASCs were launched in 2008 when Congress decided to establish the National Climate Science Center. We were not the National Climate Adaptation Science Center until much later. You'll see that didn't happen for a decade. So originally it was the Climate Science Center. The Secretarial Order was signed in 2009, which expanded the mandate of the National Climate Science Center to include climate science centers that they would engage then with the regions. For those of you who aren't familiar with the way that the USGS is divided up, we do have different regional offices around the country. And so then the CASCs were designed to be nested within those regional offices or within those regional outlines, constructs that the USGS follows. So the first three CASCs that were established were Alaska, the Southeast CASC, and the Northwest CASC. At the time, again, they were considered CSCs and not CASCs yet. And the following year, the North Central and the Southwest CSCs were established, followed the year after by the Northeast, the South Central, and most importantly, our CASC, the Pacific Islands CSC, was established in 2012. And so we've been around now, wow, almost a decade. During that time, the CASCs, all of the CASCs have seen various directors from both the federal side and the consortium side. So we'll get into this in some of the slides that follow, but the structure of the way that the CASCs work mean that it wasn't something that was established and then the same person has been doing their vision and growing it for a decade. It's had a lot more interplay and interaction from various ideas, which has been very helpful. In 2014, the CASCs that are on the continent entered into collaborations with the Bureau of Indian Affairs to place tribal resilience liaisons with each center. So those are in partnership. Some of the centers have a liaison. Some of the centers have multiple partial liaisons that work with them to develop better relations with the tribes that are on the continent and in Alaska. As you know, out here in the Pacific Islands, we don't have federally recognized tribal designations. So we don't currently have a liaison. However, we are working towards developing an Indigenous liaison that would then be outside of the BIA structure that the CASCs have developed. But we recognize the fact that the need is definitely here in the region, even though we don't have the BIA to help partner on that. In 2018, the CSCs were changed to Climate Adaptation Science Center. And I think that actually incidentally is the year that I interviewed for this job. And I remember when I interviewed for this job that I told them I would actually not have applied to the position if they didn't have the word adaptation in there, because I think the inclusion of the fact that we are moving towards not simply studying climate science and understanding climate science, but towards the next thing that has to happen after you have the science, which is applying it and moving it towards adaptation and moving it towards solutions and moving it towards action. So I was really pleased to be able to have the opportunity to come work within this network and to come at a time when they had shifted their lens away from something that was more observational and towards something that was more engaging and interactive and trying to affect change. Even though it says 2020 on this slide, in 2021 is when we actually added the Midwest Center, the most recent center that has joined us, and they were just stood up this month. Next slide, please. So these are the USGS mission areas. For those of you who are familiar with the USGS, you know that in addition to having regional divisions, we also have mission areas. And the CASCs originally sat in the Land Resources Mission Area, but USGS, as all bureaucratic organizations have happened to them, was reorganized. And when the Land Resources Mission Area was absorbed into the other mission areas, we were moved over to be under the Ecosystems Mission Area, which is where we're currently serving. And you can see that we then interact across, not only within our ecosystems mission area, but we interact across with energy and minerals, natural hazards, water resources, and the core science systems, which serves the entire USGS. Next, please. And this is the way that the casks are now divided up. If you can believe it, the Midwest and the Northeast used to be one region, but now they're split. So you can see on the continent that we now have the 7 regions plus Alaska, and then you have the Pacific Islands, which is shrunk down to dramatically smaller than what we actually encompass. The way that the casks work, so if you look at this and you say, well, what are the stars and what are the dots, is that we're in a relationship with universities. It's a 5-year relationship, but as Darren will tell you, they actually, once you're in a good relationship, they tend to last. And so you have a 5-year cycle that we go through in terms of developing statements of work and how we're going to interact with each other. And then we move into the next 5-year cycle. So the stars are where the host university actually sits. And then the little dots that you see are members of the consortium, where we have important partners throughout other university systems or within the university system that the consortium sits in. So on ours, which is, again, we're going to have a bigger picture later, but you can see that the University of Hawaii at Manoa is our consortium partner with USGS Feds. And then we also have partnerships with University of Hawaii at Hilo and the University of Guam. Next, please. So this tells you a little bit about how we work. We are this federal university partnership, and we have things that we each can do. It's really beneficial because there are things that universities can do that feds can't do, and there are things that feds can do that universities can't do. And then of course there are things that we can do together that we couldn't do apart. So we are co-located within the host system. So I'm over on the Big Island, but Heather is over on Oahu and sits with Darren. And of course I can get over there easily. So we're co-located, quasi-co-located with host universities. And then we're composed of the broad consortium that I shared earlier. And then within the university, we are able to then work towards capacity building through formal education systems. And then we also, as you know, for many of you being university researchers or being USGS or interagency researchers, you have a diverse expertise amongst yourselves of the research that you do, but you also have diverse networks. And so being able to be in these sort of partnerships where we're working with university and federal partners and with their partners, we're really building this strong network around climate adaptation science. Next, please. So we don't just go out and do whatever we want, right? I mean, we're part of the federal system. So part of that is really making sure that we are appropriately applying dollars that come from American taxpayers, right? So we want to spend these dollars in the most fiscally responsible way and getting the most bang for the buck, as they say, right? So getting the best outcomes that we can imagine for the investments that we're getting. So to do so, one of the most important things that the CASC network and many of the other parts of USGS and the federal government engage in is engaging with stakeholders and we actually are moving away from the word stakeholders because while engaging with our communities, one of the things that we realized is that, some of the language seems like it is less inclusive or less engaging than it could be. So we now talk about how we engage with people who are end users of science, or people who are managers, or people who are decision makers, people who are community leaders, people who are looking to use science to solve challenges, et cetera. So we engage with these people who are interested in engaging around science to formulate solutions. And then we develop an annual science plan, which is basically putting together a portfolio of projects that complement each other. So that, again, as I said, we're using American taxpayer dollars. So you don't just want to do, Jeff Burgett shared this with me, and I think it's great, which is the random acts of conservation, which is, you hear these great projects and you're like, oh, that's great, let's fund that, let's great, and you get it to the end of it and nothing works together to build to a greater whole. So it's developing these annual science plans and then a longer term 5-year science plans to be able to develop portfolios that actually achieve something when they come to their culmination. And then what we do throughout the period of that science plan is we solicit proposed projects that are in alignment with that science plan to build out the portfolio. And then of course we fund the projects. And when we fund the projects, we don't just say, here you go, here's your check, good luck, see you at the end. Instead, the way that the casks work is that there's a lot of engagement throughout the development of the project and then throughout the actuation of the project. And then at the end of the project, we hope that our relationship will continue so that we can continue to grow some of the impacts of what we have worked together to achieve. Next, please. So this shows some of the breadth of the CASC network. So once you're plugged into the Pacific Islands Climate Adaptation Science Center, we, as I mentioned before, so because of our working with the interagency here in the islands and working with the university systems here in the islands, we have a broad network here that is regionally focused, but we also, because by virtue of being involved with the USGS and then with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and then with the other universities that the other CASCs are involved with, have actually a really broad network across the United States that we can engage with. And as you know, people may be doing research in Florida that could be applicable here, or we could be doing research here that is applicable to something that is happening in Alaska. And so being able to engage with the other CASCs then actually builds the networks of the scientists who are engaged directly with the Pacific Islands Climate Adaptation Science Center. Next, please. So this slide, I actually really like this slide. So we often, when we talk to the CASCs that are on the continent, we try to convey to them how vast the region that we're working in is, and the fact that we are larger when you fly from the Big Island to Palau than flying across the United States. And they hear that and it's kind of meh. But I found this wonderful map that shows Eurasia superimposed over the Pacific Ocean. And so, you may not be used to thinking about the fact that you could fly from Spain to Japan would be almost the distance that you're traveling when you travel across the region that the PICASC serves. So it just kind of gives you a different perspective on how large our region is. And yet what I've found in the short time that I've worked here, which has just been a couple years now, is how connected the people are by the ocean, by their cultures, by the ecosystems that we share, and increasingly by the challenges that we face related to climate change. Next, please. So now I'm going to share a little bit about, again, I may not make it through all of my slides today. My real goal here, more than doing hurrah about PICASC, is to get you guys to be a little bit more familiar with what it is that we do and how it is that we might be able to serve you and how it is that we may be able to move your science and your efforts forward in the region. Because I think that the people that are participating today on the call, the vast majority of us are really committed to making a difference in our region. And so I'm hoping that I can help you to identify how you may fit in with us and may be able to collaborate and cooperate with us as we move forward. Next slide, please. So prior to my joining PICASC, there was a 5-year plan that was developed that is a science plan that we still based our calls for proposals off of for the fiscal year 22. And in the next year, we will be developing the next 5-year science plan. As you can imagine, many of the challenges that the region face have not changed related to climate change, but we will be developing the next iteration of this plan. When we did it in the past, we engaged at multiple levels from local, federal to state, and we engaged with people from government to NGOs to educative groups, et cetera. So if you have ideas about science that is needed, we are always welcome to reach out to PICASC. Rachel has shared some of the contact information and say, I think you guys are missing this. You really should consider that. And you may not see it in our next write-up, but we definitely read all comments that come in and take it into consideration when we can. So we appreciate any of your input. The other thing that PICASC has been involved with is the NCA 4 and the NCA 5. And we will be involved with the NCA 5 coming up. And then the other thing that we did support in the region that has informed not only a lot of our science planning, but science planning of the interagency and of local governments is the PERCA reports that the RISA led that we helped to support that are still coming out. I think the last one is coming out still this year, but I could be backwards. But those reports are really interesting, and I invite you to take a look at them to understand some of the other climate adaptation work that is going on in the region through community stakeholders. Next slide, please. So this gives you a really brief and picturesque look of some of the work that we've done related to the 5-year science plan. So the 5-year science plan, if you go look at it, there are 5 overarching themes, and then within those themes, there are sub-themes. And the 5 overarching things that were identified for the period of 2018 to 2022 is the drought, fire, landscape change, coastal adaptation and management, forest conservation, adaptation and survival of the atolls and low-lying islands, and then core questions for resource managers. And then in FY19, 20, 21, and 22, you can see that we've addressed many of these challenges. Some of them have been things that have been built off of those. So like looking at imperiled and invasive species may be something that is related to forest conservation, but we felt that it strayed a little bit into imperiled and invasive species. But you can see that we have been addressing these science concerns. And then in FY22, we ran for FY22, because we're still in 21, we ran an RFP, and we have not yet awarded the awards out of that. If I have time at the end of this, I'll be able to go over where we stand on that. But we did have 5 topical areas that we asked people to apply under, which were managing novel ecosystems, agroforestry, freshwater security, biosecurity, and then island-to-island tech transfer and sustainability. Next slide, please. So this slide shows you the spectrum, as it says, of stakeholder engagement. And one of the ways that scientists have traditionally approached engagement is with no engagement, right? They said, this is the science, this is the scientific literature, this is the question I have based on what these other fancy scientists said at this fancy meeting that I went to, and I'm going to do some more science that relates to this because it's really fascinating to me. So one of the things that the adaptation part of the PICASC name brings us to is actually moving out along that spectrum and engaging with people, communicating with people, consulting with people, collaborating with people who are outside of the scientific community, so that when you finish whatever project it is, or you get to the next step of whatever project it is that you're working on in your research, instead of turning around and shelving that journal article behind you, you actually can go out and enjoy what the impacts are of that on your local ecosystems, local community, local situation. So that's really what we're trying to move towards, is better collaboration and co-development with community members, so that the science that we're producing is actionable and moves us towards tangible adaptation goals. Next slide, please. So I'm going to now go through a number of projects. Darren, we had talked about asking questions ahead. Is there, before I delve into true PICASC, like here's research that we're doing, is there any reason that we want to do questions now, or shall we wait?
It's really up to you. If there's a burning question and you're at a transition and willing to take, otherwise, yeah, we'll wait and use the time at the end.
Okay, I'll give people 2 seconds if they want to write in one question, and otherwise I'm going to forge on.
Looks good. At least it gave
Okay.
you a moment to take a breath, to dive again.
I'll have a drink.
There you go.
Okay, perfect. So now we're going to get into some of the projects that we've supported. For those of you who are on the call who don't see your project listed, please don't think that this means that your project wasn't important. We have 32 ongoing projects with PICASC. We can't cover all of them. Every single person that we're involved with is important to us. Every single project that we're engaged with is having actionable impacts, or is at least planning to do so. So please don't think that somehow these, and if we chose your project, it's not that you're not special, but please don't think that these projects somehow outshine yours. We just couldn't talk about everybody, and you'll see that I'll be pressed for time, even with the minimal projects that I'm going to touch on today. So next slide, please. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about here is one of the projects that we have ongoing in the Marshall Islands. So we've supported USGS AROS. AROS, as I mentioned, is the group within USGS that serves the entire USGS. They do a lot of the mapping and TBDM work. We worked with Dean Gesh and Jeff Danielson to do TBDM, topobathymetric digital elevation modeling in the Marshall Islands to help create coastal inundation assessments, where the greatest elevation is only about 7 feet. So this ties into our goal, not only along sea level rise and habitability and ecosystem stability, but also around the atoll, the threats that atolls are facing in climate change. So building off of the Majuro project, we awarded Dean to work on the Marshall Islands Conservation Society, which is MIX, to expand his work to 4 additional atolls as a part of their community-driven adaptation planning. And we have a short video in his words rather than mine.
It's really just a fancy name for using stereo.
Uh-oh.
Sorry, too much click.
Keep you on your toes.
That structure for motion.
It's really just a fancy name for using stereo aerial photographs to measure heights of features on the ground or the land surface itself. So the term structure for motion, really what it means is the motion in this case is the motion of the platform itself. So what is popularly known as drones. So the motion in that case is the drone takes a photograph, camera is on board the drone, and then obviously the drone is flying, it moves, so that's the motion, takes a photograph of the same area on the ground from a slightly different perspective, takes another photograph. There you have stereo photography and can measure the height. Now what structure for motion does is uses many, many photographs of locations on the ground to refine the elevation measurement with that technique. It was a new technique for us to use, and it generated very high resolution, high accuracy elevation data of the land portion of the Majuro Atoll.
Flying lighter in the Pacific is really expensive because of the logistics of flying out there, traveling with a plane that far out into the Pacific. It takes a lot of funding and a lot of coordination to make that happen. This was a science project to see what we could do with different techniques and to do a project that was fairly feasible cost-wise.
They fly very low level, literally hundreds of feet above the ground. So the photographs that come from that are very detailed. If you looked at them, the individual photographs, you would easily recognize people and cars and bicycles and very small objects on the ground, different than the detail that you would notice from many satellite images. The closer you fly gives you that much more detail, which ends up being recognized or realized in the accuracy of the elevation model that's derived from those photographs. It will be used by local planners on the island. We collaborated with some of these folks when we were there collecting the data. One of our collaborators is Dr. Chip Fletcher, coastal geologist at the University of Hawaii. Dr. Fletcher is working with the local authorities in Majuro to apply this inundation exposure assessment, vulnerability assessment that is based on our elevation model to help with things like building codes, and trying to determine which parts of the infrastructure are more vulnerable, whether that's certain bridges or roadways, and that sort of thing.
Thank you, Darcy. So I depend on Darcy for my technical savvy. Thank you, Darcy. I really appreciate you putting that video into this presentation and then playing it. So that shows you guys a little bit about how the work that we are doing, that we're supporting, and the work that y'all are doing actually gets used. It's been really fun to work with Dean and his team. They did some of the structure for motion out here in Hawaii as well. And as you know, we have some military installations here, and they came up with some really creative solutions of using a kite to actually fly to take their photos. So they put their camera on a kite and flew it because they couldn't use the unmanned drones. And I said, that's actually a great solution that you guys worked out here, not just related to the military installations, but also in terms of other locations on our islands where we may not be able to get drones out to know that you could actually do some of this work with kites. So I really appreciate working with people who have ingenuity to share. So a couple of our other sea level rise projects that we have ongoing, we've been working with both Kurt Storlazzi and with Karen Thorne. Both of these teams are led by USGS, but they have a number of other interagency people that are involved. with doing this work. One of the things that we actually really enjoy doing is supporting various modelers who take different approaches to doing, for example, sea level rise. So some sea level rise modeling takes into consideration storm surge, some takes into consideration different inundation models, some can accommodate coral impacts or mangrove impacts, or working towards those things. So really it's to try to get at the best ongoing science and recognizing that there isn't always, I mean, this is frustrating to the general public as you've seen through COVID, science doesn't always have the answer, and that once there is an answer, it doesn't always remain the answer. So one of the things that we do like to do through PICASC is to support a mosaic of approaches so that we can start to get at some of those answers from different directions. Next slide, please. One of the other things, so mostly I've talked about how we support research, but one of the other things that we do and that we intentionally try to engage in is bringing people together. I think that the current term is called a boundary organization. We don't really think of ourselves necessarily in those terms, but we think of ourselves as sort of a convener of networks and of communities. And so one of the things that we tried to do this year was to bring together researchers, again, from that sort of mosaic approach of people using different models and different data to be able to do some of their sea level rise modeling. They might be doing it at different scales. They're often doing it for different reasons. So some for the built environment, some for ecological purposes. And then bringing those people together to talk about where do we stand in terms of the state of the science around sea level rise, climate adaptation, management. And then we brought together managers and community members and people in governance positions to talk about what are the needs in terms of policy and management development that you have around sea level rise discussions. And we're hoping, it seemed that these dialogues were of interest and of help to the people that were involved with them. And we're hoping to continue this conversation and to build this network of practice or around sea level rise as we move forward. Next slide, please. So one of the other major areas that we've been working in that was well established before I came here is ecohydrology and drought. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the term ecohydrology and the term drought, but there is, in these islands, sometimes drought is not recognized as drought because you have very wet areas that still seem very wet to people who are not necessarily measuring the rainfall, and they actually are experiencing ecological drought and it's shifting systems. So since we are really in the business of trying to help stabilize the ecological systems and maintain them through climate change by adapting them to the current conditions, understanding how rainfall patterns and drought are changing is important. So I am going to now ask Darcy to share the next slide with you, which will have a brief video of what PICASC contributed to a virtual field trip, as a virtual field trip to an international meeting that the Water Resources Research Center put on earlier this year. Thank you, Darcy. There we are. So yes, thank you. I appreciate it. It's always nice to get out in the field a little bit, right? We're in the times of COVID where we actually can't physically get out. I really appreciated that the opportunity to think about being in the field anyway when we put that video together. So that was great. These are a couple of the other projects that we're working on related to drought. As you can see, many of the titles of the projects that we work with have to do with understanding how to, what is going on and then how to apply it in a way that managers can use it. So for example, the one that Dr. Fortini is working on at the top, helping National Park Service prioritize vegetation management. And then Tom Giambaluca's work is to help inform adaptation in Hawaii through projections. And then Alan Meyer is working with understanding how soil moisture and water resources impact groundwater supplies. So that's really looking at some of the water security issues that we may face with drought. Next slide, please. This is one of the projects that we're really pretty excited about. This is the Pacific Drought Knowledge Exchange. It was launched as the Hawaii Drought Knowledge Exchange. They piloted this at 3 locations in the islands. They were very, very well received by various managers of these regions. So they started with Havo, Pu'uwa'awa, and I think one on Maui. And then they expanded this portfolio to 10 new sites within Hawaii. And now they are going to expand this effort to move out into the Pacific. And nobody on this slide knew that I was going to use this slide, but I think some of them are present. So for those of you who are present, who are the PIs on this, I'm going to also plug the fact that they're interested in anybody's ideas or thoughts about PDKE and about how we might apply it here and develop a better application through this product. And thank you guys for that project. It's great. Next slide, please. So then we have a concept that I believe Gordon Tribble, which is the director of Pierce USGS, was instrumental in sort of getting into the common vernacular, which is a ridge to reef concept, which of course is not a new concept and is not a Western concept, but is one that has been understood out here for millennia, which is the connectivity between what is happening on the land and what is happening in the water. So next slide, please. These are a couple of the projects that we have going on with corals, and I start with the corals because oftentimes we start with the land and then connect to the corals. But to understand, one of the things that is both frustrating and fabulous about working with climate change is that it's not something that you can really carve out and just talk about climate change in isolation from other things. I mean, other than talking about, you know, here are the way that the weather patterns are going to shift. But once you bring ecology into the mix, you start seeing that everything is connected. So looking at coral reef impacts of climate change involves not only looking at the impacts of climate change on water temperature, salinity, and pH, but also looking at the impacts of the way that climate change is impacting all of the terrestrial dynamics, which then alter the way that the reef systems are receiving water pulses, sediment pulses, nutrient pulses, et cetera. So, and then when you add that, many of our researchers, you know, are relatively new to climate change as their focus as well, and have been looking at other anthropogenic disturbances. So that's actually one of the great advantages that we have working in climate change as a relatively new topic, is that people often look at the interactions between climate change and other stressors, which is of course really important, not to just look at things in isolation. Next slide, please. So Darcy, can I brief it real fast while you're queuing it up? Okay, so this is in the last slide we saw that there was a collaboration that's happening between Romina King at the University of Guam in partnership with NASA. And this is some of the NemoNet software that they're creating related to citizen science. And so you see that there's not only citizen science engagement around science, but also building some of the climate literacy among citizens to be able to understand what's going on and understand how they can contribute.
Using the power of our global community, NASA has developed an interactive app called NemoNet. It's used to characterize coral reef ecosystems around the world with unprecedented accuracy. Today, we're joined by 10-year-old citizen scientist Kellen Homan and NASA scientist Dr. Ved Tarayath to tell us more about this fun project. Thank you both for joining us today. Ved, so can you tell us a little bit more about NemoNet? What is it?
Sure. So I invented a technology called fluid lensing at NASA, and it's the first technique we've had that can look beneath the ocean waves and map corals in 3D. So we've been traveling around the world using drones and this technique to map corals in 3D. And the biggest challenge we have with all of this data is how to classify it. How do we get the basic number of how many corals there are, how they're doing as a function of changing ocean temperatures? And that's where NemoNet comes in. So we built a video game that ties into our supercomputer, and you can download it and play it on your iPhone or iPad device. And what you're doing in that game is looking at our data sets that we are getting from around the world with these drones and helping learn about corals at the same time as coloring them and feeding data into our supercomputer.
Wow, this is such a cool idea to get people involved in this project. Kellen, I understand that you've been working on this project. So can you tell us, is NemoNet more like a game or is it like schoolwork? And have you learned science by playing the game?
It's kind of like a game because it's not schoolwork. You kind of get to do what you want to do. You can choose where you want to be and what you want to do. There's like 2D, 3D, and then there's stuff like that.
That sounds very fun. What kind of things have you learned from playing the game?
There's a lot of different types of coral, and there are some key regions that have coral. They are. You can classify Guam, the Great Barrier Reef, American Samoa, Hawaii, or Puerto Rico coral. So that seems like where the most of the coral is probably.
Thank you, Darcy. So you can see that's really awesome, right? Because we're engaging with the next generation of people that are going to be interested in addressing these challenges or are going to be having to address these challenges, right? That we're all sharing. So thank you for that. I'm quickly running out of time, so I am going to move through the next, let's see, 5 slides as quickly as I can. But I also really want to give respect for these slides because I think that this is another really important aspect that I haven't emphasized enough. I mentioned the fact that the other casts across the continent are engaging with BIA to be able to address the Bureau of Indian Affairs concerns and working with tribes directly. Out here, we don't have that, right? But we do have a lot of community here, and we have a lot of community here that has a lot of cultural tradition and heritage that they're connected to. And a lot of that cultural tradition and heritage is actually very much grounded in natural observation, and that is what science is, right? So there is a lot of what PICAST is doing is trying to better bridge and serve the communities that we actually have out here in the Pacific, and to learn from each other so that we can move forward with traditional management and current climate change science to best manage these systems. And I hesitate to call them resources because I think that in some ways underserves what these systems actually are, which is they are identity, they are community, they are food, they are water, they are how our corals stay healthy, they are how our awupua'a stays healthy, they are how we remember our past, they are how we connect with our children. So I think that this is something that PICAST really is working towards understanding is not just saying here is a local EA project, but understanding how that contextualizes across climate change adaptation challenges in our region and ecosystem function in our region. Next slide, please. These are a couple of other examples. So again, as I said, we often don't choose one horse in the race and go with that. We often try to fund people and work with people around a topical area so that we can get better engagement and get more community involved instead of just particular groups. So we try to involve multiple groups. So here are 2 other groups that are working on understanding social ecological resilience and ecosystem services through restoration of coastal agroforestry systems and fish ponds. And then these are our invasives and wildlife disease. So this is a lot of wildlife disease is actually also invasive species. And this is one of the projects that we've been funding with Kurt Dollar, looking at sort of some of the connections before I was talking about how drought relates to fire relates to invasive species, and that relates to nutrient pulses, to corals. So everything becomes very connected. Looking at the interplay between fire and invasive species is one of the projects that we're supporting. But again, looking at some of the interplays between invasive species and evapotranspiration and driving drought, et cetera, is how we start connecting it across different projects. Next slide, please. So these are our iconic birds that we have here in Hawaii. And one of the problems that I'm sure you're all familiar that the birds are facing is threats by avian malaria. And of course, avian malaria is being spread by an invasive mosquito. So we're working with various researchers to help try to understand what mosquito habitats are like so that managers can help control those populations and or help relocate birds to places where they should be theoretically under less threat. I think that there's still a lot of opportunity to build on this effort, but we are definitely involved with it and committed to this effort as well. And then next slide, please. I'm going to end with this so that we have at least 5 minutes for questions. But one of the things that we're also really excited about is developing the Pacific Regional Invasive Species and Climate Change Management Group, which is a mouthful, but you can remember it because it's Pacific Risk. So Pacific Risk is working across the Pacific. We are modeling it after an effort that is ongoing on the continent. Heather Kirkering and Darcy Yogi are both very involved with this. So if you have questions, I encourage you to reach out to them and engage with them more about this. I know that this is another example of one of the networks that we're growing. So you can see all of the different, we don't have all the different pictures of people that are involved, but we have all of the different logos. So you can imagine that there's a cadre of people behind each of those logos who are involved with this. And then Darcy, we had a whole bunch of other slides, but can we skip to the very last one? Sorry, Darren, we missed our student projects. We'll have to cover those in future iterations. Students, you were totally important to me, and faculty that are sponsoring students, I very much appreciate your engagement with PyCask. I wanted to get to this slide to show you some of the people, some of the faces that are involved. These are some of the researchers and then some of the people who are behind the scenes that make all of this possible. And I just wanted to extend a big thank you to those of you who find your faces on the slides and to those of you who don't but know you're engaged with us as well. Big mahalo, and I'm happy to take any questions in the remaining 6 minutes. And thank you, Darren, for letting me launch this series. I also have to tell you guys that
someone had to do it. Someone had to do it.
Yeah, pi has figured into my life in various places, and not the number pi, but actually pi the food. So the fact that I got to be involved with a slice of PyCask was like primo. Good job, whoever came up with that. It was not me.
Thank you very much, Mary Vaughn. Thanks. We do have some questions in the chat, but let me open it up because we can come back to the chat as needed. Let me open it up to the floor here first. If you have a question, please, you can turn on your camera or not. I believe you'll be able to unmute if you can raise your digital hand. I'll give that a moment to sink in while people get creative. We do.
Here, I can answer one of the questions in the chat while people are.
If you can see it, yeah.
Yeah. So I can see there's a question that says, how do I envision PyCask engaging with the current administration's climate initiatives? And that is a huge question, and I could talk about it probably for another hour. One of the things that we actually helped to organize at the Hawaii Conservation Alliance meeting this morning, the HCC, and this summer, the HCC was to try to bring together some of the interagency here, because I think that the underlying question there is not only how does PyCask engage with the current administration's climate initiatives, but the fact that the current administration's climate initiatives expanded their climate funding across the US government. And so I think that, we have myriad problems out here. And if we threw all of the money that the government is going to put into climate change out here, we still wouldn't be able to solve the problems that we face, right? It's a bigger task than that. So I think that the way that I particularly see PyCask engaging is not only in how do we spend the money towards our science priorities that we've identified with our partners, but also how do we collaborate across the interagency so that we aren't duplicating funding, so that we aren't leaving gaps that we think somebody else is addressing, and so that we're best applying the federal funding across the government towards moving towards these solutions.
Thanks, Mary Vaughn. We also, in the chat, we have a question from Aurora. How can individuals who aren't currently funded by PyCask be included or engaged in the network? There are a lot of Hawaii adaptation needs that I think remain invisible to university entities.
I think that's a great question. Thank you, Aurora. And please share this question and this answer with everybody who is wondering the same thing, asking the same thing. The way to get engaged with PyCask is just to reach out. We are open. We are not exclusive. We are open to engagement with anyone who would like to come talk to us. And we will make the time to be able to talk to you and to listen to your concerns. We are not an advocacy organization, so we're not going to be able to get on board with advocacy towards any policy position. But we welcome you to engage with us to identify the priorities that are not being met or concerns that you have that you think are really being overlooked. And yeah, so I think that the email was shared there, and then you can also always get on the mailing list to identify when there are funding priority or funding opportunities that come out.
Thanks, Mary Vaughn.
Darren, you may actually be able to speak to that also from a university side of how people could get engaged.
Yeah, I mean, you showed some examples too. So certainly some of the community science work is a great way to get engaged, but I mean, it would not take the place of first reaching out directly to any of us, you know, through the contacts on the website, through our emails here, and just let's have a conversation and start thinking about what that could look like, or what, you know, for us to get a better understanding of what those needs are, and then start to think about how from these different approaches, whether it be the federal side, university side, and all of us together can then start to look at how we might address some of those issues, bring funding, you know, like it or not, it always takes a little bit of funding to do some work. So
Can I
thank you,
offer
Rachel.
one
Yeah,
other
I was
thing?
just going to point out to everybody, Rachel's also adding some content here for links for you folks. Thanks. Go ahead, Mary Vaughn.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one other thing, which is that I think I really enjoy working with PICAST because a lot of the people think a little bit outside of the bounds of where we've been taught to think. And one of the ongoing activities that Romina King out in Guam is leading is an effort to try to bring a better exchange between managers and scientists. And we often think of this as a one-way thing of like training the next generation of students and exposing them to management. But one of the things that she's really trying to do is then bring managers back and sort of expose them to scientists' realities so that we can get a better dialogue going and better understand where each other is coming from. So if that's also something that is of interest to your manager networks, I think that that's something that I would also encourage you to reach out to engage with further. So it's not just we're not just supporting the student academic side, we're also supporting the management and application side, because they are one.
Thanks, Mary Vaughn. We do have some additional questions as promised. We're gonna save the chat, and we're gonna make sure that these get in front of Mary Vaughn or others of us that can address them and write to you in response to some of the questions that you've listed in the chat. We're wrapping up on the hour here, and I want to be timely and honor everybody's schedules today. In fact, my clock just ticked 1 minute past. So real quick, mahalo. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to launch. What better way to have launched this seminar series? Thank you, thank you. We hope and look forward to seeing you again in many different ways. And enjoy the rest of your afternoon, or morning or evening.
Yes, mahalo.
Take care,
Have a good one.
everybody.